Hi, everyone. Welcome. So excited to have you here. Please take a moment to settle in, grab some water, and get comfortable. We're just going to give it a few minutes to let more people join before we get into it. Um, so really looking forward to uh, having everyone here and for Brian's talk. Um, And as we wait, feel free to uh, say hello. Let us know where you're joining us from in the chat. Um, and if you'd like to share your LinkedIn profile as well, so we can stay connected, you can do that. I see people joining in. So for everyone kind of joining in right now, we're just taking a minute before we start. So please feel free to share in the chat where in the world you're joining us from. I'm currently in Mexico. I see we have Karen from Dallas, Texas, Norette from Scotland today. We have Emma in the UK, Kyle from Toronto. I love it. So global. We really truly have global representation today. Jennifer from Paris. Mafana Bang from Nigeria. This is incredible. Oh, so great to see this. So um, we're gonna get started in just a minute, but keep sharing your locations in the chat. Katya in Barcelona, Gil in Scotland. Wow, I am loving this global map that we're putting together right here today. This is wonderful. Okay, so, and we have Catherine from London. Lovely. Okay, well, I think that we are going to get started. We also have, we have a couple from London. That's so lovely, Catherine and Lisa. Nice London representation going on here. Oh, Brittany in Chicago. Incredible. Wow, so great to have you all here with us today. So welcome in. My name is Tali, and I'm really excited to be hosting today's session. I also want to share, if you guys want to drop your LinkedIn profiles in the chat, please feel free to do so as well, so we can all stay connected after this session. So looking forward to connecting with you all. And before we get started, just a few little updates. I just want to also thank Better Mode that are supporting our Talks and Pros series today and that make this possible. So thank you so much. And you can also check them out as well in the link. And before I obviously introduce our main event and get to Brian, I just want to let everybody know that we have a lot of upcoming exciting events from Led By happening in person as well as online, just like London Community Week taking place in July, where I will, and myself and Brian will be attending as well. So I hope to see you there. But I will share more about the events in the end. And we'll also share some links for you guys to register. So keep an eye out for that as we come to a close. And okay, great. I'm seeing everyone's LinkedIn profiles being dropped here in the chat. This is lovely. So if you haven't yet and you'd want to connect with everybody, share those profiles with us. Wonderful. So as before I introduce Brian, as we go through this session, please feel free to also drop your questions for Brian in the chat, the one that you're currently using right now. And then we're going to gather them all at the end and leave time for the Q&A. And hopefully we'll be able to get to everyone's questions. And just also don't forget that we are recording this event and you're going to be able to find it in the Led By video library. So you can always rewatch it over there. Incredible. Okay, wonderful. So I think that we are going to get started. So for this next person, I feel like Brian needs no introduction in this space. But for those of you who don't know, Brian Oblinger is a leading voice in community strategy and operations. He's known for turning complex challenges into clear, actionable plans. As a strategy consultant and founder of Community Strategy Academy, he brings over 25 years of experience helping hundreds of different companies connect with their customers to build an engine for engagement, satisfaction, and retention. Through his courses, consulting, and writing, Brian also equips teams with the tools that they need to build communities that deliver real business results. And he's also the podcast co-host of In Before the Lock. So we are so grateful to have Brian here with us. And I am going to let you take it away from here. So thanks.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Tally. Appreciate it. If we could grab my slides up here. There we go. Perfect. Hey, everybody. Good to see you all. I see you in the chat, as is customary for me. As I'm going through this, if you have questions or comments, feel free to drop them in there. I try to keep an eye on it. If I don't catch it live, then we'll give it a shot as far as answering them at the end here. So let me go ahead and jump right in. I'll skip past the Who's Brian stuff and get you right to the real content here. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about advocacy programs. What are they? How do you build them? What are the best practices? I think that there might be some surprises in store. This is kind of one of those topics that's kind of counterintuitive, actually, about how to build a good one is probably different than maybe what you think. And so we'll start here, which is that what often happens is, I show up at companies and ostensibly I'm there to help them build community strategies and programs and things. And usually advocacy comes up, and it's been coming up a lot more recently, especially with like customer marketers and things like that. And through the conversation, as I talk to people about advocacy, like, hey, tell me about your program. How does it work? What does it look like? Can I see it? Typically people say, oh yeah, we have that. We have this advocacy program. We got one of those. Yeah, sure. Checkbox, right? And then I go look at it, and what I typically find, not always, but in a lot of cases, that actually what they have is a reference program, and that's what they call their advocacy program. And so what I'm going to talk about today is actually like how to kind of pivot from like a reference program only to a actual full-on advocacy program. Or if you're building net new, this will also be relevant. It's all the same thing. But I just want to point out, and I'll show this a little bit later, that references are just one aspect of advocacy. It's one item on the menu. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like, but we'll jump into how you build this thing from the start and, like how to think about it. So first and foremost, I think it's important, for me, now that I've said that, advocacy programs are not just references, that I should probably define what I think they are. And so to me, advocacy programs are about what you see here: cultivating, inspiring, activating, et cetera, passionate and vocal supporters. And we'll talk about how you actually find and select those passionate and vocal supporters. But the middle bit here is actually really important, and kind of what I'm going to talk about today, which is oftentimes what you see people do when they build an advocacy program is they just put like a form on their website, and it's like, great, anybody can sign up, and we have 5,000 advocates, And realistically, what you want to do is kind of the opposite of that. What the best programs in the world do is focus on quality. They focus on kind of creating some FOMO, keeping it small on purpose, and really driving towards the results for the advocate first, which we're going to talk about how you do that today. So that's what advocacy is to me. That's how I've run these programs. I've had, advocacy under my purview as the VP of, community and CX back in the day. So everything I'm going to show you today is real. It's things that we did, that we proved out. And along the way, we'll also show you some examples of other companies who do it well, so that it's not theoretical, right? You can actually go see what people are doing and how they do it and what it looks like. So with all that said, let me drop you into here. Now, there's a lot here. This might be a good slide for you to, take a screenshot of, or I'll give you the slides at the end. These are all going to be publicly available as always, so you can, just go grab these. But what I'm trying to represent here and help you understand is that oftentimes reference programs are really in service of us at these organizations, right? It's all about us and having people do reference calls, that kind of thing. And so, as we sort of look at how they're built, right, how they're constructed, what the program looks like, it's all about us. It's usually about high quantitative measures, because we're just going to build a big stable of people who are willing to do a reference call for us, and then we're going to churn through them. A lot of times that's a self-nomination bit. It's open-ended. We don't requalify people. What we give is often like very rare. Like, we don't really give people anything. Maybe we say, hey, every reference call you do, we'll give you a $5, Amazon gift card or something like that. But it's not really valuable, to the folks doing the reference calls. And it's kind of singular in nature, right? And the outcomes are really about us. So that's how most reference programs are built. On the contrary, what good advocacy programs do is it's really more about our customers' needs. It's about our advocates and us advocating for them internally. It's about high quality. The best ones are invite only, merit based. There's a requalification process. I'll talk more about all of these things here in a moment. We usually want to give way more than we take, like way more, like almost to the point that people are confused, right? Like, you're just giving me all this stuff and you don't ask for anything. And that way, when we do ask for something, the answer is usually like, yes, absolutely, I would love to help you, right? You've given me a ton of things. From an activity perspective, there's a lot more that goes into it, than just a reference call. And the outcomes, are about our advocates and our customers first. And if we do that well, then we'll get what we want from a business kind of perspective. So I'll talk about how you sort of position it internally, how you measure it, how you help people understand that this is not just a group of people that we get to frequently abuse, for our purposes of whatever it is that we need. It's actually the exact opposite, right? So we'll dive a little deeper into kind of each one of these as we go. One quick thing to say that often comes up, especially when we're, in an audience with people who build communities for a living, is like, well, how does this fit, with like my MVP program, my top contributor program in the community, for example? And so my guidance often looks like this, which is advocacy programs, reference programs, if it's going to stay separate, if it's not included, and then a top contributor program definitely have, some overlap in different ways. It really depends on, who those folks are, what their motivations are. What you'll find is that some people, if you were to have all three of these programs or two of these programs, for example, is that some people might tell you, hey, I enjoy being an expert in the community, right? Like, I contribute a lot of solutions or try to help people in the community, but I'm not really interested in the other acts of advocacy that would be part of the advocacy program, like speaking at a conference or doing like a media hit. Bloomberg called us and they want a quote from a customer. Some people are just like, hey, I'm not really interested in that, and vice versa. Some people might say, hey, I'm really interested in speaking on stage or, doing this, that, or the other thing, creating content. Again, I'll show you what that menu looks like, but I'm just not going to hang out in the community, and maybe I don't really get anything out of doing reference calls. So where people fit in this Venn diagram is really specific to them and what their motivations are and their persona. So there is overlap, but there's also a bunch of things that make them separate and different. And so today we're going to kind of focus on the advocacy side of this, knowing that there's some overlap, but really we're going to talk about what makes it different and why that matters. So hopefully that kind of gives you some context there. All right. So I alluded to this before. Like, we need to get over this idea that these people work for us for free and that, they're just our a big pool of people to pull from whenever we feel like it, and that we're doing them some big favor or something. Like, it's just not true. Okay. And so internally, if we're going to build a true advocacy program, this is the thing that we got to all get through our heads, and we have to convince our organization as well, is that we work for them, and that this is about them and advocating for them and their success and giving them opportunities. And if we do that, then all of our business outcomes that we want will flow. And it's not to say that, we don't care about the business outcomes or we don't want them. Of course we do. That's why we're doing this. Let's keep it real. But just understanding the order of operations is actually the key here. So hopefully that makes sense. So I put this here right out of the gate because I think it's the thing that most people miss or fail with advocate programs, which is when we think about, how do we measure this? I often talk about measurement last, right? In most topics. Today, we're going to talk about it first for a reason, which is, what we really need to do is develop some sort of measurement program that measures the impact for our advocates first. And so these might be some of those things. We're kind of measuring like outcomes for them. How many times did we get you out there in the world, with an opportunity for you to be seen and heard, and hopefully that is a feather in your cap or an asset that you can use, right? And so things like that might be like, hey, get a quote in a media article, receive an award, whether that's physical or otherwise. Did you get a raise? Did you get a promotion? Did you move to a new company because of something that you did in our advocacy program? You got connected with someone and they gave you, your dream job, whatever those types of things might be. How many times have you been on stage, if that's what you want to do? On and on and on, right? The last couple there are super important as well. Are we actually listening to you? If we're a product company or a services company and you're giving us ideas for what we should be doing, are we listening to those? Are we implementing those? Are you getting credit when we implement those? Are you seeing, positive improvement that helps you be better at whatever it is that you do with our products or services? And so this needs to be the basis by which we measure an advocate program first. And if we start talking about how are you going to build a dashboard, or how are you going to report internally to your company what the value of an advocacy program is, this is the beginning of that answer. It's not the only answer. We obviously have to measure the business outcomes, but we need to measure their impact and represent that internally to help people understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, and that this is actually the core reason that we're doing advocacy. And if we're going to focus our efforts to build programs and throw money at it and people and all these other things, that these are the metrics by which we measure success. Say that 10 times fast. So just want to make that really clear, that we need to do both, but I want to position this first, and that let's figure out how to measure their success. A lot of these are just going to be asking them, we might know how many media requests or awards we doled out or whatever. But for other things like, hey, did you get a promotion? Did you get a raise? Was your career otherwise impacted? Those are probably survey based, right? So there's going to be a couple of different mechanisms from a data perspective here that we're going to have to figure out. But it's well worth it, and then ultimately being able to show the progress of like, hey, look, like advocates are more successful because of this program. Isn't that great? And then obviously drawing the line from that to, and what are we getting out of it? So with that said, like, how do you start to build an advocacy program? Let's kind of shift to like back to the beginning of how do we build one of these things. As is always the case, in any advice that I give, you're probably tired of hearing it. I'm going to keep saying it. It's about personas, right? It's about understanding who people are, what their motivations are, what types of activities they may or may not want to participate in. And kind of plotting them, somehow like this to sort of understand, okay, like, is this person intrinsically motivated? Are they extrinsically motivated? Are they somewhere in the middle? Right? It's a continuum. It's almost never a binary. So people kind of fall on different ends of the spectrum. And then the same thing with like, how much of a advocate are they? Are they a promoter? Are they a detractor? Right? Like advocacy programs are kind of about advocacy, right? And if people are more detractors and that sort of thing, then like they may not be right for it, or they may be if we channel it in the right direction. So you might, for example, look at this chart and say, well, boy, I don't know about like Greg and Rick, right? Like maybe Greg and Rick are kind of like, they shouldn't be advocates because they're a little bit more negative, they're a detractor, that kind of thing. And it's like, well, it depends, right? If the reason that they're kind of lower on the list here towards detractors, because most of what they do for us is critique our product, critique our services, our support, whatever, that might still be really good, valuable, feedback for us and ways to engage them. However, they might not be the best person for a media request or a success story or something like that. So just because someone's kind of on the limit here or kind of, not the happiest person in the world doesn't actually mean that they're not an advocate or that we can't, find value or common ground with them to, for both of us. But generally speaking, like you're not going to, get a bunch of people who hate you to be in your advocacy program. And so that kind of back to the Venn diagram with community top contributors. That's one of the mistakes that people make, is thinking that just because someone posts a lot in community or do a bunch of activities, that they're an advocate. Because as we know, a lot of top contributors or super users, we might call them in communities, actually like post a lot because they're mad at us or they're kind of negative. So understand that, do the work to kind of figure out where people fall on spectrums like this. You can make your own, this is just an example. And go from there. So how do we translate that? Well, we take that and we translate that into something like this, which is we say, okay, we have these people. This is a sampling of 4 of them. Okay, they're a promoter, they're intrinsically motivated, or they're kind of more neutral, like our friend Rick, but he's extrinsically motivated. And we know he's really interested in telling us about how our products suck, right? So maybe we sort of engage him on very specific activities, and also being respectful of the availability that they have to do this, right? Some people are going to have a lot of time. Some people are going to have almost no time. So it's really about understanding who they are, what they care about, how much time they have, and like what are the core, activities or acts of advocacy that they could engage in that's going to be the most valuable for them. And then secondly, for us, right? And so this is how you sort of translate, who people are and all that stuff into what is our advocacy program. So if you just look at the list of activities here, you're starting to get an idea of, okay, these are some of the core things that we do here as part of a, proper advocacy program. And then we channel that into something more formal. And so that's how we go from, who are these people to like, now we're building a program that's valuable. Shout out to the names here. If you're wondering, bonus to anybody who knows where these names come from. I always try to slip in some like cultural reference stuff in there. So I'll leave that a mystery, but you can put in the chat if you know where the names come from. So there's a lot on this slide. Tally blows it up immediately and says White Lotus. That's correct. So there's a lot here. This was going to be a build. So let me just kind of focus you on the top left-hand side over here, on identification. So how do you start to like find these people and, build the program once you understand? First and foremost, it's about quality over quantity. And a lot of companies struggle with this. I alluded to this earlier, right? It's like, hey, we have, this form on our website and 10,000 people have submitted their names and email addresses as being an advocate. Sure. But how many of them are actually advocates? How many of them are actually active? How many of them are, going to be a great advocate for us? The answer is a very, very small percentage. And so I know that people want the big number, but if you look at the examples, which I'm going to show you in a minute, of people who do this well, they actually do the complete opposite, right? They build these really tight, small on purpose, almost like, how many people should be in this program? Do 10 less, like intentionally sort of obtuse about the low number of people that are in there. And that way you can focus on a smaller number of people to deliver more value. Classic, I guess, if we're doing cultural references, this is classic Jerry Maguire, less clients, more attention, The second one is to avoid devaluation in politics, meaning that who we pick, who we allow into the program, who we select needs to be on merit, right? It needs to be that they've engaged in the activities that we want people to engage in the activities for. We want them to be a great advocate. We want their fit to make sense in the program, not because they're our biggest customer who pays us the most money, not because their renewals coming up in 3 months and sales thought it would be cool to put them in the program to try and save the deal, those kinds of things. So we got to avoid that and really make this merit-based. And then, as we talked before, the difference between people who say a lot and people who say quality things. So super users versus advocate. They're both valid, but for our purposes here, we're looking for advocates, not just people who say a lot. So that means that the selection process, once we've sort of identified people that fit into the quality, the non-political, sort of pick, and advocates, then it's invite only. And this freaks a lot of companies out too, because it's like, well, we just want people to nominate each other and like whatever. And it's like, you can do that as a beginning step, but ultimately we have to be the ones that are in charge of this thing and picking who's coming in. It's not a democracy, right? This is us building very intentionally a program to deliver on objectives, not, just be nice and let everybody in or whatever. You often do that through cohorts. So it's usually like an annual thing. Hey, we add 20 people year 1, we add 10 people year 2, or whatever it is. It's usually some sort of regular cohort-based thing. We talked about merit-based criteria, and then the requalification. And this one freaks out people too. Just because you're in the program doesn't mean you're always going to be in the program. And just because you got in doesn't mean you can stop doing the things that got you in the first place. So airline frequent flyer program always comes up here as a good comp of like, hey, every year we do a requalification process. We want to make sure you're still fitting in here, that you're happy, that you're part of this, you're engaged. If not, no worries. It's not a big deal. We'll move you to alumni or emeritus status. You can always requalify again next year. It's not forever. But the idea that like you achieve this advocacy, this program, and then you're in there for life, actually doesn't build great advocacy programs. And this is another one where the politics can come in, because you might have someone who's a member of the program. They work at one of our big customers. They're up for renewal. Sales is like, you can't take them out of the program or move them to alumni status right now. We're trying to close this deal. And you have to fight that as much as you possibly can and not allow that to be the way that we make these decisions. Again, it's merit-based. We set the expectations. People know what they are, and they either achieve it or they don't. This is a meritocracy program, right? And so that's really important. So that's how you start to think about the discovery, the eligibility, the membership of it. And just to give you, sort of some examples of what those acts of advocacies could be, the list is likely much bigger and longer, than this, but there's kind of 3 buckets. Typically, you kind of have like content-based advocates, right? People who they're writing things for you. They're helping you with content in different ways. Maybe they're doing video series. They were a guest on your podcast. Of course, we have the people who are just experts and want to do those kinds of things. Some people say, hey, I'm not a writer. I don't really want to like be on those kinds of things, but I would love to host a user group. I'd love to present at a booth somewhere. I'd love to speak at your round table or be on stage or whatever. Great. Like, let's have a track for those people. That's okay. Like, you don't have to do the other stuff, right? And then also influence. So, hey, Gartner wants to talk to a customer. Would you be interested? That's an analyst call. You'll notice reference calls is here, but it's one thing, right? Media requests, promotional features. And then again, that feedback is also influence. And so you probably have a lot of advocates that fall under maybe both the kind of like knowledge and solution side of things and content, and also the feedback, ideation, that kind of stuff on the influence side. And so our goal should be to build a menu like this for people and help them understand, like, here's all of the things that you could do as an advocate, or you should do. This should be public, right? This should be part of your website or whatever, so that other people who want to be advocates can see this and know the types of things that they should aspire to do or should be doing to have the best chance of being included in the program, right? So it should be very open, should be very clear, should be comprehensive, probably should be about double this size, to be honest with you. And just think about all of the different ways that someone might advocate for us beyond, hey, can you take a reference call? Okay. So with that said, here's example of success stories. You've probably all seen this before. This is a great example of one that I built, or we built, my team built back in the day, which is like, hey, let's give people a way to just tell their story, right? And so this was both a way for them to advocate. It was also a way for them to get their own name up in lights, right? And have a tangible asset that they could use to show their boss, here's what I do and my value and how great I am, or use it as a future asset to get a new job, or whatever the case could be. This was also connected to the awards program. So if you put your story here, you were automatically entered into the annual awards. So then you got another chance where, hey, if you win the award, now you can be an award winner and be on stage at the conference and that kind of thing. So good example here of how to put that into practice. Like, it's easy to put a bunch of bullets on a slide, but how do you make it real? How do you build a program around it and execute? And then how do you weave them together, right? So this one obviously has tentacles into awards programs. It has tentacles into like media stuff, because we would use these for media stories and press releases. It's all related, right? In some way or another. But the key thing here is that they got value before we did, right? Like, they probably got more value out of this than we did, actually, because their name is attached to it. It's their story and their words and their work. And yes, we got to have this available for people to look at, but it was really a great example of a advocate first program, in my opinion. Okay. The next thing is you got to protect these people, especially if there's only a few of them. So like, one of the challenges with not doing a program where you have 5,000 advocates in it and only having 20, 25, 30, 50, whatever it is for your company, with less of them comes the challenge of, well, if there's less, then we have to use them more, right? And as soon as customer facing teams, specifically sales, marketing, those kinds of folks, as soon as they figure out the value of this program, you're going to have like a flood of like, hey, can we use them for this? We need this for this. And what often happens is you have, even within your advocacy programs, like let's say you had 35 people, 40 people in your advocacy program, right? You're probably going to, just like a super user program, just like anything else, you're going to have like the super users of the super users, right? So within a program of 35 people, you might have 5 people for, where they're like the top advocates of all time, right? They're doing everything. And so what happens is we burn those people out because we just use them over and over and over again. It's also not great for us, because then we're just putting the same person out there all the time, and that kind of gets old. And so my recommendation is you got to build a managed usage model, meaning you're going to put a limitation on how often people can be used for anything that is on the list of acts of advocacy. And we have to have a system to track that, and we have to enforce it stringently. You simply should not allow your advocates to be burned out. We should not use them too much. And we need to really protect them, from other people inside the organization that don't care about any of that and just want to use them and abuse them until they can't anymore. And so the way that you do it is you build a model, you build a tracking system. There are platforms that do this. I'm not going to name any of them, but some of you probably know this. You can buy them and bolt them into Salesforce or whatever. And it tracks all this stuff, for you. But what you need to do is come up with a model like this, where you say, okay, within the 3 buckets, content, events, and influence, let's assign some weighting, some sort of point value, something like that, and sort of say, hey, each of these, we think events are like the hardest thing to do, so that's going to be 4 points. We think influence activities, most of those are like, hey, can you take a phone call? That's okay, maybe that's a little less. And then you build a model like this, where it's like, hey, within 90 days, you can only use people worth of 6 points. And if you look at the weighting here, that means that like there's only so many combinations or only one singular thing that they could do, right? Generally speaking, depending on how you set up the points and whatever. And that way we say, hey, like generally speaking, we're not going to ask people to do more than 2 things, if only one thing every 90 days. This drives companies nuts, right? It's like, oh, no, what do you mean we can't use them? You know, we used them 80 days ago and you're telling me I have 10 more days I can't, use them. And it's like, yes, that's correct, because they're one of our most valuable assets. And again, they do not work for us. So again, counterintuitive, perhaps, probably going to drive a lot of companies nuts, but you have to protect these people or they're not going to be your advocates very long, right? They're just going to burn out and you'll never see them again, which nobody wants. Okay. So, and then I saw Lisa was asking a question in the chat about what content were they sharing for their success stories. Yes, we did have this format bit here. So the problem, solution, impact. We know these folks weren't writers. So what we did was we said, hey, here's kind of a format in which you could put your story, right? Tell us what the problem you were trying to solve. What did you do about it with our product? And what was the impact? If you can share it, being respectful of like, they work at companies, they have rules. They can't tell us we saved $20 million, like, but give us a broad, like we saved a bunch of money. And then we had a team that helped them sort of massage this if they wanted to. Some people could write it and just post it. Some people said, hey, I'd love, kind of take a once over. So yes, we had a whole program behind this to help them structure it, help them write it, all that kind of stuff. Jennifer saying in the chat with this limitation stuff, you had a spreadsheet. Awesome. Something is better than nothing. Like, I don't care if you're doing it on a sticky note on your computer, right? Like that's way better than just letting people run wild. And, we're using Jennifer 40 times in the last, 50 weeks or whatever. It just kind of doesn't make sense. So you do, as long as you're tracking it and you have a way to handle it, great. That's great. Okay, so what are some real world examples? Salesforce, I think you've heard of them. Their MVP program is a great example of a lot of the things that I've already talked about here today, right? It's invite only, it's a meritocracy, it's about quality over quantity. They're very clear on their website, right? If you go to this page, they are abundantly clear about here are the things that makes an advocate, or in their case, an MVP, right? Here are the things that you have to do. Here's our guiding principle. Here are the process to get into the program. Here's the types of things you need to do. Here are the people that are in the program. Here's why they're in the program, right? Like, it's a really great example of how to do all of the things that I'm telling you in practice. I also recently ran up against the Freshworks example. Another really good one, very clear, very concise, here's what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. Here's what you're going to get out of it before we try to take anything from you. So if you're looking for examples, go find these slides. I'll show you the link at the end here. Click through these URLs and go check out these programs, and you'll see a lot of the elements of what I'm talking about baked into these 2 examples. So it's not theory. It's like people are really doing this out there in the world, and great artists steal. You should too. The same thing on the recognition and reward side of it, right? So over here, we sort of have like, hey, we're trying to inform and inspire people of like, what is this program and why does it matter and why do I want to do it and that sort of thing. But then it's also about recognizing and rewarding existing folks. Tableau used to have one of the greatest examples of this type of a program. They were called the Zen Masters. They've recently changed that to be Visionaries. You can go, check out that site, and they do a really great example of showing, who's involved and why and that sort of thing. I think that, their program was sort of rooted to, and Irene's actually asking this in the chat of like, hey, isn't this an MVP program? Yes, some of it was based on the participation in community, but what they did was pluck the people that were both top contributors, but also would be good advocates. And so this is where, again, you see the Venn diagram a little bit of like, they mixed those 2 programs in some sort of way. But at the end of the day, what the real end goal of this was recognizing and rewarding top contributors, but ultimately positioning them to be advocates and do acts of advocacy beyond, whatever was happening in the community. So there's a little bit of blurring of lines here. Again, you do you. Great example from Microsoft, who have one of the like oldest MVP programs, I think, on the internet. Might have been one of the first ones out there, actually, carried through to today. And they do a great job with events of giving them access. So once again, the access bit of this, they actually fly people out to summits. They're Microsoft. They have the money to do it. They fly their advocates out to these summits and they reward them and those sorts of things. Yes, it's called the MVP program. I think you'll find when you read their, what these are about, there's like the word ambassador is often thrown around. So the names kind of get confusing sometimes of like, what is this program and how does it work and what part of the Venn diagram is it? But generally speaking, like they're all some form of advocacy as well. All right. So let me kind of summarize here and then happy to answer any of the questions I didn't get to in the chat, right? So if you're a company where you're starting from a reference program or, that kind of a thing, this will be relevant, also relevant if you're building net new. I think that like step one is you got to rebalance the charter of this thing, right? Like you got to sort of understand either a rebalance of what you have or a let's set expectations and do it right the first time bullet number one there, which is like, what is this program? Who is it for? Why are we doing it? How are we going to measure it? And the answer to all of those questions needs to start with, hey, this is for our advocates. This is about them, right? Everything we talked about. You have to develop that persona-based approach, right? Understanding who people are, what they want, why they want it, what are the activities they might want to participate in as a result of that. I also talk a lot about expanding the program over time to be multi-tracked. And what I mean by that is you're probably going to have people that are, maybe maybe you have like executives and you have partners and then you have customers. So maybe you do a multi-track advocacy program based on that. Maybe you do it kind of to Irene's point. Maybe you have so at one point I had this concept, we never shipped it, but we had this concept of what we called the ACE program. And the ACE actually stood for something, which A was for advocate, C was for champion, and E was for expert. And those corresponded to, okay, advocates are advocates. That's what we're talking about here. Champions were supposed to be like executive thought leaders, right? So a little like round tables and stuff like that. And experts were the top contributors in community. And so our idea was, hey, let's put everybody together under one program where they have they have their own track and you could skip tracks or be a part of multiple. But that way, we had one program governing all of that thing. So that's a good example of like how you could have tracks and also reward and recognize and have people be part of the program for many different reasons, depending on who they are. That might not be something you do at the very beginning, right? When you're kind of getting your feet wet. But over time, as you're building out a program, you could consider something like that. Prioritize quality over quantity. We've talked a lot about that. Invite-only selection process. You need to build something that is merit-based. And what I always say is like, yeah, there's some level of us selecting this, but it also needs to be based in the data, right? So we need to have some hard numbers about what has this person done to date? How many acts of advocacy have they done? What kinds? Is there a weighting, to those as well? And so that there's not this like, well, they're our buddy, so we put them in the program. And when people say like, oh, this is favoritism, you put these people in and not me and like whatever, it's like, well, here's the spreadsheet, and here's what the gradings look like. And, there needs to be some rigor to the process beyond just we hand selected a bunch of people and said they're the best. Expand the list of activities over time. We talked about clear limitations and usage. Refresh the program and communication somewhat often, right? Tailor those pages to both reward existing advocates, but also inspire potential new ones is a really important thing here. Ultimately, advocacy programs also serve to inspire other people to want to be advocates, right? Even if they don't achieve that full level of being recognized in the program, they should want to do some of the acts of advocacy. And that's a big part of like what that web page, should be. And then last but not least, what's the measurement of this thing? How do we talk about it? How do we tie it to business outcomes? And oftentimes that's going to be cohort analysis, right? It's going to be, hey, our advocates drive this much retention or this much renewals, or every time they do a reference call, people who get reference call with our advocates tend to buy 5 times faster, or they buy more, or we close the deal easier, or whatever, those outcomes are across sales, marketing, product. We implement their ideas, our product's better. We need to tie it back to the business bit there. So that's kind of my summary of the whole thing. And now happy to bring Tally back, and we can do some Ask Me Anything. The slides that you just saw, go to brianoblinger.com/slides. You'll see all of these. You can download them, make a copy, do whatever you want, as well as all the other talks that I've ever given. So it's all there for you.
Thank you so much, Brian, for that. And we will drop the link to Brian's site in the chat so you guys can go and find the slides there and see all the other very incredible content that he shares. So in terms of questions, let's start off with Katya's question. We will highlight that on the screen. And she asks if you have any advice on how to measure the ROI of the advocacy program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think some of the things I just mentioned, like you probably want to tie it to, in the beginning, at least 1 or 2 like customer success, sales, marketing type goals. So some of those might be for customer success. It might be how are advocates helping drive education around the product, adoption of new features. People are just better educated, so they need less help because of our acts of advocacy, not just for advocates, but for everybody who's consuming that content, right? Those are typical things that CS cares about. And so maybe if you can deputize and enlist some advocates to help you build training and technical content that CS can use, right? Like that's a great outcome. So you can tie it to that. For support, it's usually like, hey, people who engage with advocates, engage with their content, engage with their events tend to submit less support tickets. They're easier to support, right? Could be one. Product, we talked about that. Are we listening to them? Are we prioritizing their ideas? Are we implementing their ideas? And if so, how does that influence our roadmap is a great ROI. I would say just figure out what every group in the company cares about and then work with them to sort of build a bridge to say, hey, we have all these advocates. They're doing all this stuff. How can we help you? How can we get them involved? And then what's the value, of that internally, and figure out what the measurement path is from, hey, this person contributed to a course, or they wrote an article, or they did a talk, or like whatever. And how do you draw the line from that to, whatever those business outcomes are? So in that way, it's probably not any different than how we think about community from an ROI perspective. And, but it's obviously not like the most immediate thing. Like you can't necessarily say, hey, like one of our advocates did this webinar for us, and we can directly draw the line. A lot of it's going to be cohort analysis, directional things like that. But ultimately, the business should understand that this is a huge asset, to everything that we do. And that's kind of up to us to figure out what the dashboard, looks like.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that. And you kind of touched upon it. You told Jennifer in the chat that Google Sheets are good too, but do you have any specific tools that you recommend for kind of keeping track? Any ones that you personally love?
I mean, I don't know if I love them.
That you're okay with, that you're happy with. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's like, I'm trying to remember the one that we used back in the day that was like a Salesforce app that we bought. I think it was Reference Edge is what that one was called, where it kind of has all of this stuff pre-built in there, in terms of like you set up your acts of advocacy, you put in who your advocates are, and then there's like a way to attach them to those things and keep track and scoring model. So that's an example of one. I'm sure there's a bunch of these, but like I said before, ultimately, I think use whatever tool you use Airtable, use Google Sheets, use Asana, like just whatever, I think wherever you can track it, the better. I think the key to it, though, just to add this on, the key to it is it has to be something that's scalable, and it has to be something that other people in the organization that work around the advocacy program can use. And so that's why you often see people like bolted into Salesforce with like Reference Edge and stuff, because like, hey, sales is already in there, they kind of know how to use Salesforce, right? And so like our hope and our thought is that if it's in there and, they kind of can go in there and do it. So what I would not do is build some process or document or something that's like arduous and people don't know how to use it or how to tag things or whatever. Because then just like anything else, you're going to have bad data in, bad data out, whatever. So it's just got to be something that people can use. Like I said, if that's a Google sheet, then knock yourself out. Sounds good to me.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm a big fan of Google Sheets. And then we also had Lisa, who earlier, when you were sharing the specific success stories, she asked what content were they sharing for their success stories, and were they directed to produce specific content for that?
Yeah, I answered some of that live. I want to comment on the directed part of it because I missed that part live. So let's talk about that one, which is we didn't direct them to do anything. We kind of said, hey, here's the structure. Here's some like potential format. Here's some resources to help you if you don't want to be a writer. This is pre-chat GPT. So nowadays you could probably say like, hey, do your first draft in there and then we'll help you, hone it into your own language or whatever. But it was really actually important to us to not direct them to say like, well, you have to reference, our product and, use the exact name that we use for it and like say nice stuff about us. And it was just like, hey, do you have a good story to tell? Let's help you tell it. And so I often got asked, like when I show that the customer stories example, people often ask, well, what's the difference between, because that was hosted on Community, it's still there today. You can go, it's, the link is there. And people would say, well, why are we doing this? What's the difference between this and like the customer, like the white papers and stuff that we have on the .com that marketing produces? And the answer was the second part of this question, which is, there's no direction. The end goal is not us selling more stuff or having our product marketers, write the exact, like, let's use the words we use, how we describe the industry or the product or the feature or whatever. It was by customers for customers, right? And so I think that's actually a big part of this, is that's what made it different. That's why people liked it and would rather do that than the marketing stuff, is that it was, by them, for them, in their own words and credited to them, as opposed to being like, hey, we'll put your little quote in a sea of, a 19-page white paper we're making, like, thanks, see you later. It was more centered around them. And so did we direct them to do anything? Not really. We just wanted them to tell their story in a really like authentic, trustworthy way. And we saw that worked, right?
Yeah, I was going to say authenticity is key here. So, and great to see that it actually does work. So we have two final questions. I know, right? Surprising. Two final questions. One from Tali, who asks, how much advocates would you recommend to have?
Can I first just real quickly say the volume of tallies in this session is off the charts today, with multiple tallies.
Popular name.
Yeah, love to see you're advocating for tallies everywhere.
Yeah.
How many advocates should you have? How many do you think you should have? And then cut that list in half. Like if you're starting out, I know that sounds like it's kind of, I'm being a little flippant, right? But the truth of it is everybody's like, we need to have as many of these people as possible. We need to have 100. Like your CEO or CMO is definitely going to see your like target of like, we're going to have 15 people. And they're going to be like, no, we have to have 50. Are you crazy? And it's like, trust me, when you're getting started, you want a small, manageable, you're trying to create FOMO on purpose, right? The whole point of this is like, yeah, you know what? Everybody wants to be in the club, but they can't all be in the club. And the little red velvet rope is there. And we have the bouncer, and you know what I mean? And it should be only the top of the top. And you should be kind of religious about that. This is the goal of this, is not to make everybody feel good and let them all in and like whatever. I want you to aspire to be one of the top 10 people that ever did this thing. Like that's the goal of it. And so the number, that's in the eye of the beholder, probably depends on your company, probably depends on how many customers you have. Like Salesforce, probably, I don't know, how many Trailblazers are there, or, it's like, there's probably like hundreds or something, but they're a company where they have like literally millions of customers. So it's a proportional, what that percentage is, I have no idea, but it's proportional to their industry, their customer base, that kind of a thing. But, smaller the better to start, and then you can scale it over time, and just learn.
Yeah, that makes sense. And our final question, I feel like there's no talk today that doesn't come up with this topic, from Katya, who says, do you have any suggestions on how we can smartly use AI to run and manage these advocacy programs?
Hmm. You know, I'm sure there are ways. Like we talked about how to help people if they're not writers, how to help them kind of get started writing content. I'm sure there's AI in some of these systems we talked about to help you discover advocates that are already doing these activities. Communications. Like I'm sure there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. I actually think this is one of the most you should keep this as human centered as possible. I'll put it that way, right? I'm not anti AI, but I think in this particular case, I think you want to have real relationships with these people, and that's part of keeping it small so that you can do that and scale your relationships with them. So I'd kind of push back on this one a little bit to say I think you want to keep AI limited to being tools that you use for specific acts of advocacy or discovery of advocates. But I don't know that you want to automate this thing, a lot. I think it's more about the relationships you have. And this is what I've seen work, right? Like my teams that ran advocacy programs, they had the cell phone numbers of all the advocates and vice versa. And they were all like in WhatsApp, just chatting every day, about non-work related stuff and whatever else. And that seemed like to me, the better approach and what actually worked. And again, when you go back to those people to say, hey, we have a request of you. Would you mind doing this thing for us? They're like, of course, man. Yeah, whatever. I'll send you a picture of my dog too, because that's the natural like conversations they were already having. And so, yeah, I guess that's my base advice here is this should be one of the most human programs, if not the most human program you have in your entire company. And yeah, use AI however you want to use it. But I just haven't seen like some specific system that's like, oh, you have to have this. Your advocacy program is not going to work because it's not AI. Yeah, that's my take on that one.
Yeah, thank you for that. We appreciate it. And I think that also a lot of that could be relevant for community in general, a lot of what you mentioned here. So thank you so much, Brian. We really appreciate your time today, the incredible insights. And I think, I could say this for everything that you kind of share and teach, but the way that you break down the information and really give the step-by-step process and the specific tips and the little hidden references as well. It's just, it makes, learning this so much more interesting and so much more fun. So we really thank you for your time today. Let's all give Brian a virtual round of applause. Brian's LinkedIn is also in the chat, so feel free to connect. And again, we're so grateful for your time today. And thank you to everyone who showed up and for your questions and for participating. We do have just a few little final announcements before we let you all go today. Just some housekeeping. So for any of you who are not part of the Led by community, feel free to check us out on social media as well as join our community. Links will be mentioned in the chat as well. And earlier I mentioned a lot of events that we have coming up. So we're going to share the links in the chat, but just a quick kind of recap. June 11th, we have an in-person meetup in Barcelona. June 16th, we have the launch of Led by Community in Lisbon. June 17th, we have a workshop in New York City. These are all in person. And June 19th, we have Beyond Marketing, How to Position Community as a Business Driver with Avital Noller. That's online. And then, of course, the highlight, July 8th to 11th, London Community Week. Well, Brian will be speaking. I'm also going to be speaking, and I really hope to see you all there, whether in person or virtually. So thank you, everyone. Brian, thanks again. Looking forward to seeing you in London. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day, a wonderful evening, wherever you are in the world. And thank you, everyone, so much.
Thanks, everybody. See ya.
Thanks, Brian.